Looks good.
Okay.
So do you want me to go ahead, Crystal?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Greg. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know it's a bit of a trying time, and finding housing is not an easy thing when you're looking at it from outside the country, etc. But what I'm going to try and do is give you some tips today so that you avoid being in the house that is a nightmare, basically. So you're going to have some major decisions to make in the next little while. You know, you need to think about, where do I begin? How do I look about for places? What do I think I need to know before, what I need to consider before I begin my search? One of the things that we strongly recommend, do your research. A lot of people just walk out and say, oh, this looks good, I'll take that. London has a very high vacancy rate, and finding places shouldn't be that difficult unless you're looking for like a one-bedroom apartment or a bachelor apartment. Those are a little tight, but if you're willing to share with people, you'll find lots of options and be able to find a place that's comfortable. Many of them are near the college. We strongly recommend you get a bus pass, so you might as well look at the London Transit routes to make sure you've got easy access to the college, whether it be main campus or downtown. We suggest you look at it as a 5-step process with regards to things. Number one, you want to think about your costs. You want to think about roommates if you're going to have any roommates. You want to think about accommodations. What do I need in those accommodations? Sorry, Crystal, next slide.
Oh, I'm there. Is it not
on
showing
my
up?
screen? It's not.
Oh, is it showing up for you, Caitlin? You don't see the process looking for a new place?
No.
Oh,
Crystal, I think you need to stay on the PowerPoint throughout this. Like, make sure you're not clicking on any other screens.
Okay. I didn't think I was, but so you still can't see that?
No.
Do you see anything on my screen?
No.
The decisions page.
No.
The second page.
Okay, I will try to screen share it again. Yeah, because on mine it's switched. Now do you see it?
Blank. It's all blank.
Yeah, because it says I'm sharing my screen,
Okay.
and I'm looking at the process, looking for a new place. Caitlin,
It's still blank.
But it's not visible.
Yeah, we're realizing that. I'm gonna stop the sharing. Caitlin, if I send you the PowerPoint, do you think you might have better luck?
I can try.
So, Crystal, what I'm going to recommend is I'm going to go ahead with this, and we can offer to email this to all the people on that want it.
Okay.
All right. So again, in the process of looking for a new place, there's 5 steps: cost, roommates, accommodations, your lease, and your lifestyle. Now, under costs, you have to think of money needed. You're going to pay anywhere from $450 Canadian dollars plus utilities up to as much as $1,000 per month for if you want to live on your own in an apartment or a bachelor. You need to sit down and calmly think about how much you can actually afford and when your money shows up. Are utilities included or not? Utilities can add up to $100 a month. And don't just believe what the landlord tells you. Ideally, you would talk to the current tenant or ask the landlord for an email the previous tenants to find out what the utilities actually cost along the way. You know, and does that include internet or not? If it does include internet, what bandwidth is the landlord giving you? Because often they will give you the basic internet, and it won't be enough if you've got 4 or 5 people sharing it, or you're doing a lot of Netflix downloading, etc. So you need to know what your bandwidth things. The other thing is a lot of, I don't know why, but a lot of international students will pay by cash, pay their rent by cash. And I would never recommend this unless you get a receipt immediately. And even if it's a piece of paper that says X number of dollars for rent for X month at X address. You want to make sure you've got something. Don't just hand over cash. That's a bad practice. And, you know, when push comes to shove at the end of the year, landlord might say to you, well, you didn't actually pay me for that month. And you say, yeah, I did. How can you prove it? So get a receipt, even if it's a handwritten note. You want to think about how you can reduce your costs. Will the landlord let you do small chores or whatever to take on some of the rent costs? They will often ask for first and last month's rent. All right. And under provincial legislation in Ontario, they can legally ask for last month's rent when you sign the lease, but it's industry standard to ask for first and last. Up to you whether you want to get into a fight with the landlord over that, but technically they will ask for at least last month's rent. Insurance. I'm going to tell you a lot of students do not get insurance. You want to look into the cost, and it'll be about $300 or $400 a year Canadian. We've had, unfortunately, in the last 5 years, we've had 2 different international students. One caused a fire that caused $50,000 worth of damage, and they didn't have insurance. Another student caused $60,000 worth of damage in a fire and did not have insurance. So for $300 or $400, it's well worth looking at insurance. And lots of landlords are now requiring students to have insurance when they go into places. All right. Step number 2, roommates. Like I said, if you want to reduce your costs, the best way to do that is to go into a sharing accommodation, sharing a house, etc. But you want to be careful, because if you sign a lease with other people, you become liable for those other people. So if they screw up, don't pay the rent, cause damage or whatever, you as a tenant could be liable for the roommate. So we strongly recommend individual leases. And we also strongly recommend try not to go in a place where there's too many people, because the more roommates you have, the harder it is to get along with everybody. So you want to look at your living habits. You want to think about chores. You can actually sign a roommate agreement, and we have it on our Fanshawe website, our Fanshawe Housing website. You want to look at that. And you want to look at bills, responsibility, i.e. paying for groceries. Are you going to share toiletries? Are you going to share food? Who's paying for the utilities? We strongly recommend an agreement which distributes those costs evenly amongst people. Like, you don't want somebody to take on all the responsibilities for all the bills, because if they get shorted or non-payment from one roommate, that means all those bills don't. So it's better to share it around and have different roommates take on different responsibilities. You want to make sure, next slide, please. You want to make sure that the roommates are compatible. So you might be asking some questions before you agree to. Ask the landlord if you can contact who that you might want to live with, because you want somebody that might have the same goals as far as academics. You know, they don't have to be your best friend, but you want to make sure that, you know, if you're a night person and they're a morning person, that could cause a conflict. Or if you're a morning person, they're a night person, that could cause some conflict. So you want to be aware of that. Step number 3, accommodations. You know, do you want a house? Do you want a room? Do you want an apartment? you take a look. You want to look at location. Do you want to be downtown? Do you want to be close to campus? Do you want to be close to a grocery store, to a job? So, sorry, somebody's talking. I can't hear them.
Could please mute yourselves? Thank you.
Okay. So when you're looking for a place, you know, have some patience. We have we have an accommodation checklist that's on our website as well, because we recommend you look at least 5 places to get an idea. And some people might be saying, well, I'm out of the country. How do I do this? We strongly recommend look at taking a temporary place. There are temporary places in London that you might take. And like I said, London's got a fairly high vacancy rate. So you could come for the last part of August, first part of September, and you'll be able to find a place at that time. But we do not recommend taking a place sight unseen, because there's no guarantee what's on the website is in the actual place. Next slide, please.
Glenn, you just need to unmute yourself. I had to mute everybody as a whole.
Sorry.
That's
So
okay, thank you.
you want to make sure it has everything in the place that you want, like a laundry, dishwasher. You know, are there enough bathrooms? Does the place need repair? Is my personal safety, you know, are windows lockable? Do the doors lock? Are the places close to a bus route to campus, etc.? Fire safety. In Ontario, we're supposed to have smoke and CO2 detectors. So CO2 is carbon dioxide detectors. Those are supposed to be in the place, so you want to make sure that they have them when you're looking at it. And in case I was muted when I said this, like I said, there are places to look at trying to get a temporary place at the end of August and the beginning of September, so that you can find a place once you're here. Strongly recommend do not take a place sight unseen. Fanshawe has a website of listings that people can go to look for places. We take places that we get 2 complaints taken off that list, but there's no guarantee that there might not be a scam. So we strongly recommend actually looking at a place before you take it. Leases. Next slide, please. Next slide. It's not going. All right, I'm gonna go continue on. So number 4 is leases, and typically it's the first thing students do is they sign a lease, but you really should do the first 3 steps before you get to a lease. You want to think about leases in the sense of what type of lease. Some landlords want 12-month leases, some want 10, some want 8. I'm going to say the industry standard in London is most landlords want a 12-month lease. Some landlords will offer 8, which students would prefer, but I'm going to say those are pretty rare for people to find. The big thing for you to understand, and this will be a bit complicated, but there are 2 types of rental situations in London which will affect you. One is if you do not share a bathroom or kitchen with the owner or the owner's immediate family, or if you're not a tenant of a tenant, or if you're not subletting, you will be covered by what's called the Residential Tenancy Act of Ontario. That's the provincial law. And that law will protect you against a bunch of things in a lease that might be incorrect. So, like I said, if you don't share with the owner, you're not a tenant of a tenant, or you're not subletting, you'll have provincial protection. So if there's something in the lease that's illegal, the law will override it. And in fact, landlords in Ontario are now supposed to be using what's called the Ontario Standard Lease. If you Google that, it'll pop up. And that's the lease landlords are supposed to be using in this type of scenario. Be aware that if you sign an application to rent a place, that's binding. So don't sign an application thinking, well, I'll sign the lease later and maybe not. But if you sign an application, that's binding. So you need to be aware of that. The other area that you need to be aware of is if you're not covered by the provincial law, you have absolutely no rights. So if you share a bathroom or kitchen with the owner or the owner's family, if you are a tenant of a tenant, or if you're a sublet, you have absolutely no rights. You have rights under human rights law, but as a tenant, you have absolutely no. So you need to be careful of those. Sometimes those are attractive because those type of landlords will offer shorter leases or cheaper leases along the way, and they're fine. You just need to be aware going in that they provide you with no protection with regards to the law. You need to think about whether or not you're going to sublet. Sometimes if you sign a 12-month lease and you want to go back home for the summer, you want to try to sublet, that's possible for you and it's legal under the provincial law. But I'm going to tell you, for the last 4 months, the #1 question I've been asked by students is, how do I get out of my lease because things have been online? So there's not a lot of market for subletting. So if you sign a 12-month lease, be prepared to pay for all 12 months. Ideally, you would try to ask the landlord for the contact information for the previous tenants. You want to get they're the best indicator whether the landlord's a good landlord or a bad landlord. Previous tenants can tell you what their actual utility costs were. They can tell you whether the landlord was good about fixing things. They can tell you about whether you got to cut the grass or shovel the snow, things like that that you need to be aware of. Next slide, please. You want to look at the place and determine whether you are okay with a loud place or you need absolute quiet. Some people, so typically in a quiet place, you want to make sure if you're in an apartment building, you don't want to be next to the garbage chute or next to an elevator. You want to be in an end unit, a top unit, etc., to reduce the potential noise from neighbors along the way. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned about roommates, and you want to think about lifestyle. If you're in a house, you're going to have more chores to look after, getting garbage to the curb. You're going to have to think about dishes, etc. So the roommate agreement that we talked about, you want to think about, as I mentioned, grass cutting, snow shoveling. Smoking's a big one. Lots of landlords are putting no smoking in their leases. Not really enforceable unless you've got tenants in a house with separate leases. If it's a joint lease where a bunch of you are living together and you're smoking, landlord cannot really enforce that. Okay. Lifestyle, this is #5 with regards to, you need to be aware of city bylaws that might affect you. So, you know, sometimes we'll get a house with 5 students in it and they all have vehicles and there's not enough room for parking. So, well, you're going to end up getting tickets. You need to be aware that the City of London has a 24/7 noise bylaw, so you need to be aware that that could be an issue. You need to be aware that indoor furniture can't be outside. While I'm on furniture, I might mention there are some places in London where you can maybe pick up some used furniture, although that becomes more difficult because of COVID along the way, but there is an issue that way. Next slide, please. You need to think about, this is some extra stuff you need to be aware of. What are the landlords required to do? So they're required to take care of the place and do general maintenance. You know, all the doors and windows must operate properly and not be broken. Screens have to be in the windows from June 15th to September 15th. All bedrooms must have windows of a certain size. So if you're in a basement bedroom without windows, that's illegal, totally illegal. It's also an issue for fire safety along the way. As I mentioned earlier, smoke detectors, CO2 detectors are required within a place. From September 15th to June 15th, the temperature requirements within a place that are required by law is 20 during the day and 18 at night. That's a minimum. Some students have been contacting us recently because we've had temperatures in the 30s, 35, and it's been really hot. They wondered about laws about maximum temperature. And unfortunately, at this time, there is no maximum. All right, so you might want to think about that if you need an air conditioner, etc. A requirement in Ontario is that water is a requirement and cannot be turned off ever. So sometimes a landlord might try to turn it off because they don't like what you're doing. The only reason they can turn off the water is they have to do short-term maintenance. They have to provide water to you. And there is an agency from the city, the London City Property Standards office, that you can call in, and they would force the landlord to turn the water back on. Electricity is also a requirement, same thing. It is, they can't turn that off. And again, you can call in the city property standards office to require the landlord to turn the power back on. All right, bugs. Landlord is required to remove bugs. I know this is a bit of a creepy thing to be aware of, but they are required to take care of this. And some landlords will try to make you pay to remove them. They cannot do that unless they can show and prove that you caused the bug infestation. All right, and they would have to show you a bill from an exterminator to do that. Typically, when we've had students that cause bug problems, they have a year's worth of garbage in the garage, which is kind of scary. That can cause rodent problems. Some students will put a year's worth of beer bottles or cans in the kitchen. That will cause cockroaches, which can be a scary thing. But typically, the landlord must take care of bugs. Next slide, please. And also rodents. Like I mentioned, if you don't take care of the garbage the way you're supposed to and end up with rodents, you could be liable for the cost of getting rid of them. But otherwise, landlords are required to remove them and cannot bill you. Next slide. So we want you to have some success. We're trying to make this as heads up as possible. You know, I know looking for a place or trying to find a place from outside the city is not easy. But I'm going to say to you, and I say this to all students, if you take a little bit of time to do some research and take a little bit of time to look for a place, you will have better luck rather than renting a place and then right from September, you've got 8 months of hating the place that you're in, and it's a bit of a problem. Our 4 points, main points to succeed: ask the current tenants about your landlord, or ask for the landlord. If it's vacant, ask for contact, email contacts. We have a book called the Renting in London booklet. It's on our website, and we strongly recommend you read it because it answers questions that students typically run into when they're renting. We strongly recommend getting everything in writing. Receipts are one thing, but any promise from the landlord to paint the place, do anything improvements, it's useless if it's verbal. Even if it's a confirmation email that they will do it, get a date that it's to be done by so that you're aware that it's supposed to be done at a time that's appropriate. And again, we strongly recommend a roommate agreement, which is on our website, because often roommates get into issues along the way. We do roommate mediation at the college, so if roommates have disagreements, then they need to have it sorted out. We will actually do roommate mediation, but we strongly recommend doing a roommate agreement, even if you're on separate leases, because you're going to live together for the next, I don't know, 8 months, etc. So you might as well get in practice about certain things, about household chores, having visitors over, whether or not somebody can visit when you've got an exam the next day, etc., so that you've got that cleared up with regards to things. As far as resources are concerned, generally I'm at the college on Tuesdays or by appointment with that. My email is gmatthews, so GMATTHEWS @fanshawec.ca. So that, you know, happy to have people contact us. Community Legal Services is run through Western's law faculty. It's a free legal service so that if you have an issue or need some help to go take an action against your landlord, etc., you have that. And you might, if you are concerned at all about fire safety in the unit, London Fire Services will come in and actually do a survey and make sure everything's legal. If you're in an apartment building or a house with 4 or less units, that's units, not bedrooms, the landlord is supposed to have a license. So there is off the city website, there is a place to go to verify whether the property you are looking at actually has a license. Apartment buildings or huge towers do not need a license, but anything with 4 units or less must have a license. So I'm going to leave lots of time there because I know people will have questions. I see chat is at 99 and plus, so I'm not sure whether or not there's any specific questions.
So far the chat, a lot of it has been amongst themselves.
Yeah.
So if anybody has specific questions for Glenn, if we can put those in the chat format.
Okay, I see one about booking an air flight. I don't know if I can't answer that. I don't know if anybody in the international office could answer that.
Can you
I
read
do
the
have a
question?
question.
I'm not seeing it. Oh,
So I have a question. I have booked my flight for August 21st now, and I'm preparing for quarantine actually. I had asked IRCC officer, he said I can travel. I have received my visa before 18th of March, despite my course is online. Now I need your help.
okay. So we have had some issues with students being allowed to leave, to actually board from their home country. So even though you may meet all the rules to enter Canada, that doesn't mean your home country is going to let you at this point. For example, any of the students that I've had that have booked arrival services coming from India, they have not been able to board. They have been told it's too early to board and to rebook once they've gone to the airport. So that might be something else that you want to look into as well, is even if you meet all the requirements for Canada, your home country might still be having some issues with allowing that to proceed.
Next question is, they wonder about who takes care of quarantine.
What do you mean by that specifically? Who takes care
What
of?
I'm guessing is who in your office, who in the international office gives information about quarantine?
So as far as quarantine plans and options for the 14-day isolation period, you would want to contact me at Fanshawe Cares at fanshawec.ca, and I can send you our resources and options. So we have arranged some discounted hotel prices for students who have to stay in a hotel. The less cost is going to be if you can move directly to your long-term accommodation. But for those that can't, there is other options. So I can send out those resources, and it also has a checklist of things to make sure you have prepared for when you go to the airport.
So a few people have been asking, will this presentation be posted somewhere for them to see it?
Yes, so I've been told that this will be posted. Every session of the 14 days will all be linked in a library. Where exactly that will be, I don't know yet, because I'm not the one that is.
Well, I see Caitlin's already answered it.
Oh, perfect.
So,
Caitlin, where did you answer that? Or Caitlin, can you answer that out loud? Oh, it's for the quarantine stuff, right? Yeah.
okay, I'm still looking through the number of questions keep increasing, right? Few people have said they can't see the presentation, so
So Caitlin did actually add it into the conversation, and I think a couple students also re-added it later on. So there is a link in the chat here to see the PowerPoint presentation. But I've also asked if an email can be sent out to everybody that's so that you get a personal copy. So I'm just waiting to hear back if that's something they can do. I think it should be, because we have all of your emails because you've registered. So they should be able to send out the PowerPoint.
all right, like I said, questions are increasing, but most of it's personal between people.
Yes, yeah, lots of it was personal between them.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, guys, please put your questions in the chat. We don't want the microphones to turn on, please.
Ma'am, it's not the accommodation. It's yesterday I got a mail from college about that my course is written that my course will be in January, but I have booked my flight on 29th of August, and my course is a blended course. So why they have now written that it's my course will be in January?
Sandeep, are you in aerospace?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So
Yeah.
what I would recommend is that you reply to that email for more information, but there were not enough students to run that program. So it has been deferred, unfortunately. But you need to respond to the email because it's a specific question for you. And then they'll be able to help you out, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I'm still looking for housing type questions. I haven't seen any. Some people asked about Woodstock campus. We don't have a listing service for Woodstock, but you could contact the campus directly to see what they have in the way of anything that might be helpful. I mean, obviously, I will help students that are at Woodstock with regards to any issues that they have. We just don't have a list. Well, actually, on the housing main page, there is a drop down for Woodstock. I just don't think there's a whole lot there.
Glenn, I see a question. Can you let us know if rent is inclusive of other bills such as electricity, etc.? Can you just speak on inclusive versus?
Yeah, so there's two types of pricing. One is rent plus utilities. One is rent including utilities. So the rent including utilities is usually a little higher, but less, usually less. Although if utilities are not included, it's up to you to try and keep your costs down. So you turn off lights, don't use as much water, things like that. But it's totally up to what you can negotiate with the landlord. Sometimes the landlord is quite willing to help with regards to things, and you could try and negotiate that. Large landlords typically do not negotiate, but smaller landlords might be willing to negotiate a price with utilities included or price without utilities. And it's kind of just a personal preference. Totally up to you with regards to how you might want to do that. Oh my God, I'm up to 90. I'm still going through the questions.
Yeah. Crystal, there's been some questions about on-campus accommodation. Can you just
Yes.
speak briefly to the difference between on and off-campus?
Yes, so on campus would be our residence options, and unfortunately residence isn't able to function as a quarantine location this term just because they have a limited space, because they are only putting one student per suite side. So you can still apply to residence for the whole academic year, which would be September to April. However, you cannot apply to just stay for the 14 days of your isolation. So that would be the difference. Is on campus you have residence as the option, and then off campus is every other option. Does that make sense?
So I've got a question here. You know, what if we don't want to lease? Well, we still recommend getting things in writing so that you're aware of it, but you can do what's called an open-ended lease, which has no end date. And sometimes that's more flexible with regards to things. A couple of questions have asked about us looking for places. We do not find housing for students. We sit down and talk to students about what to look for, what to be aware of, things like that. We refer you to Fanshawe's housing website that has landlords that want to rent to students, but we don't actually go out and find things. One student's asking about housing conditions for January. Like I said, London's got a fairly high vacancy rate. And if you're looking to come in January, I would start looking in November, right? It's way too early. If you're starting classes in November or in January, it's way too early right now to look. We suggest start looking in late October, early November. The one question here about temporary places. It's not ideal because it's a fair distance to Fanshawe, but there is one place that we do suggest students use. It's on 2 bus routes. It's called the Guest House on the Mount. You can rent daily, weekly, monthly. It's kind of like, it's in fact an old nun's residence, and they operate it like a hotel, and probably be the cheapest hotel that you can find in the city. So it's something, so if you Google Guest House on the Mount, it'll pop up. Now I'm at 120 messages.
Crystal, there have been a lot of questions about the quarantine period. Do we recommend Airbnbs? How do students get food? Can you just kind of briefly maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so
and how that relates to housing?
Yeah, so we are actually going to cover more in depth on that for Thursday, sort of what plans and options might look like. But we are actually having a lot of the students, and I only know this because they are contacting me for rival students, is they are finding accommodations through Airbnb, especially if they're coming as a group. That seems to be a good option as far as costs go. The lowest rate that we could find for a whole hotel nightly was $60. And that would include breakfast, but only breakfast. So that was the lowest partner rate that we could find for the 14-day isolation.
So Basil Paul asked about booking an accommodation before arriving in Canada or finding after they get here. We recommend get a temporary place before you come and then find your housing once you're here. Like I said, London's got a fairly healthy vacancy rate. And the problem is if you book a place sight unseen, you're locked into it. So we don't recommend you do that.
No, some of our students are finding that you have friends or family members here already. And if they're going and looking at a place for you and they're confident, and if you trust their judgment, that might be an option for it. But yes, you can actually quarantine with your friends or family. You have to have a plan though for how you are going to keep yourself isolated from the rest of the house. And you cannot stay in a house with anyone over the age of 65 for your isolation, or anybody who has any sort of immunity compromising issues. Okay, so those are the two rules where if you get to the customs and your plan doesn't consider those things, you may not be allowed to enter. But Thursday, we actually will go over more specifics on how to make your isolation plan.
Right. So a couple of people have asked about whether or not the suggested pricing includes utility bills or not. Some do, some don't. It's basically, like I said, what you can negotiate with the landlord. Somebody asked about group leases versus individual leases. I would suggest you never, and I mean never, sign on a lease with a group unless you know those people. Because like I said, you become liable for them if they screw up or don't pay the rent or things like that. Somebody asked about the basic cost of basement. Again, they'll be cheaper, but you know, it's generally $450 to $600 for a basement. The on-campus housing stuff has been put up on the chat. Somebody asked about websites. Like I said, I would go to the Fanshawe College /housing website to find landlords that list with the college.
Glenn, I'm seeing a question about the London South campus.
Right.
That area?
I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, there is not a lot of housing in that area. I might suggest people that are looking to be on the London South campus actually contact me directly. I can give them some leads to be aware of. We don't recommend places, but there's not a lot of housing in the London South area. There are a few apartment buildings that they might want to think about, but not a lot of house rentals with regards to that. So I would just shoot me a quick email and I'll maybe suggest things that they can consider looking at down there. On-campus housing costs, you'd have to contact them directly to find that out.
Oh, I'm actually going to post that right there. So that's
Okay.
about the approximate cost.
Okay, change student for transportation.
For the 8-month term. So that's
Right.
for the whole academic year.
Again, I'm just trying to scroll through. I'm at 160 more.
So there's a question just asking that if they do the first term online and they come for the winter, is there likely to be enough housing for them?
Well, you know, I gotta believe, because so many students are doing their stuff online, I think there's going to be tons of housing available. It might be a sublet that they're looking for. But like I said earlier, I would start looking maybe late October, early November, because landlords don't typically post their properties until 2 months out from when it's going to be available. So if you look now, all the rentals will be for September, October, things like that. So registration and a half.
The South Campus, so the South Campus is pretty far from the Oxford campus, which is where residence is located. We don't usually recommend that students live on campus and travel daily to the South Campus. It is about an hour bus ride.
Yeah, the good thing is there is busing. What a lot of students do, they'll rent downtown where there's a fair bit of housing and take the bus, which is then maybe 20 to 30 minutes, saving the time to going out to the main campus. Okay. Somebody's asking cheapest accommodation in London. You could literally find a place for $350, etc., but we don't generally recommend them because they will be bug infested, rodent infested things. We usually recommend $450 as kind of the floor with regards to finding a place. I'm skipping over online stuff because it's all the international questions.
There's a question from a male student who says he's having a hard time finding a place to stay because a lot of renters are looking for female tenants. Do you have any suggestions for that?
Okay. This is a bit of a tricky one because if the landlord makes their building all one sex, that's actually legal. There's an exemption under the Human Rights Code to make a building one sex. But I'm going to tell you, there are just as many landlords willing to rent to all males as there are to all females. I know it's a pain, but it's a matter of being just a little bit persistent along the way. And like I said, you will find places. They are out there. It's just a matter of taking the time to. So I've got somebody has been paying a lease since April, and they weren't able to sublet. So they aren't able to use it because they can't travel. So like I said, there are lots of places where students are looking to sublet because they can't actually be in London. Enough housing for students.
There was a
Then I've
question
also
about,
seen a few questions, sorry, Crystal, about renter's insurance.
Right. So like I mentioned before, you're looking to pay $300 to $400 a year. There's two types of insurance you want to consider. One is content insurance, which insures your personal items if they get destroyed. The other one is liability, and this is the more important one. And this is where I used the two examples of students that ended up owing $50,000 and $60,000 because they caused fires. So what I recommend is once you're in London, just do a Google search of London insurance companies and start calling around to see who'll give you the best price. We can't obviously recommend a particular company, but shouldn't be any problems getting insurance unless you're in a house with like 6 to 10 people. That becomes difficult to get insurance. Still going through 180 messy.
and yes, your classes will have domestic students as well as international students for most programs.
Sundar,
leave
you keep
yourselves on
unmuting
mute.
yourself. Please stay muted.
Right. Some people are asking about landlords. We cannot recommend landlords. We cannot suggest landlords. Like I mentioned earlier, the best thing to do is contact the current tenants or ask the landlord for information on how to contact the most recent tenants. They are the best indicator whether it's a good landlord or not.
A few questions about the synchronous classes. So that just means is that class is actually going to be hosted live. So for those classes, you will have to be online during that specific time period.
All right, I think I've got all the housing type questions. There are a few there for international to answer. My email has been put in the chat room a couple of places. So, feel free to email me with specific questions. Happy to answer them. Happy to give some advice. As I said, the South Campus is a little challenging with regards to finding housing. I can suggest options. Like I said, I can't recommend, but I can suggest where you might begin to look for landlords that are in that area. But again, I do recommend look at bus routes. The Wellington, the South Campus is off Wellington Street, a road. Look for apartments or whatever that are off Wellington Road, which goes, right into downtown. It may be worthwhile, looking at downtown, even though it's a bit of a hike to the downtown or the South Campus. But downtown will give you more options than specifically in the south end of the city.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up this portion of the questions. You can always send us an email to international@fanshawe.ca if it's a general question. And if you had more housing specific questions, you can get in touch with Glenn. We've left the email there a few times. We just want to thank Glenn. Thank you so much for being here today and helping us with what we know is a huge concern for most of our students. So thank you so much. And sorry about the issues we had with the slideshow.
Yeah, no problem. And I see one question there. Sisters, one's downtown, one's at the main campus. I would look in the Oxford, Richmond area if you're going to live together, because you have a straight bus from Oxford and Richmond straight to main campus, and you have a straight bus to downtown campus. So I would look in the Oxford, Richmond area. But thanks, Chris. Sorry to.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. And for the St. Thomas campus, your best bet is to actually reach out to your coordinator or support staff at that campus. They should be able to help you with finding local accommodations. And then hopefully we'll see you all back on tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be talking about banking, getting your SINs, some scams to look out for. And then we'll also have a guest speaker from Cooperative Education. So that's what tomorrow we'll cover. And then we have plans for the rest of the week as well.
So I'm going to jump in right quickly.
Perfect.
Never give your SIN number to a landlord. Never. The only people who legally can ask for SIN are an employer or government. Sorry, Chris, I'm jumping in all the time. But
you are welcome to jump in now. That's why you're here. You are the expert on all the housing stuff. So we are just so happy to have you here.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Everyone will have a good evening or good rest of your day, depending on where you are. And we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning at the same time in the same place.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks, Caitlin, for your help.
Thanks.
Good luck. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Yeah, you too. Bye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you and goodbye.
So busy, Pierre.